The gala lanyard still hung around my neck when my phone vibrated. A notification from Grant's account. I tapped it. There was my 6-year-old daughter, Zoe. Below her face sat my brother's caption. Some mistakes grow up and make more mistakes, I scrolled. The top comment was from our mother, Brenda, leaving a laughing emoji. Thousands of strangers were already piling on. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this reaches. I did not cry. I did not gasp or ask why they would do this. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. It was a balance sheet. And my family's account had just gone into permanent default. I walked across the garden patio and found Adam. He was speaking with a colleague. I touched his arm, and when he turned, I handed him my phone. He read the caption. He saw my mother's comment. He did not offer empty comfort or pity. He looked at me, and we entered a cold, calculated state. Adam is an architect. He understands structural integrity, and he understood that the structure of my family had just irrevocably collapsed. We left the gala immediately. The drive home was a blur of adrenaline and simmering exhaustion, but the fatigue vanished the moment we walked through the door. By 11:51 in the evening, we were sitting at our kitchen island, the cold reality settling in. The transition from personal pain to strategic operation took exactly 12 minutes. I had spent over 45 years internalizing their behavior, letting them dictate the narrative. For a long time, I believed their casual cruelty was just the baseline cost of admission to this family. That is the trap of normalization. When you are raised inside a toxic ecosystem, you are conditioned to view emotional abuse as a standard operating procedure. You feel silenced because your mind has been trained to audit your own reactions instead of their actions. You convince yourself that absorbing the daily damage is a cheaper invoice to pay than dismantling the entire foundation. But looking at my 6-year-old daughter's face being offered up for digital consumption, the illusion evaporated. This was no longer familial obligation, it was a hostile takeover, and I was going to liquidate their assets. I opened my laptop, Adam opened his. The documentation process began. We did not just take screenshots like a panicked victim. We harvested data like forensic accountants auditing a corrupt corporation. Adam captured the original post, the exact timestamp, the unique web address, and every single derogatory comment generated by Grant's followers. He meticulously cataloged my mother's engagement, saving her digital laughter into a secure folder. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney. It was past midnight, but he answered on the third ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries, apologies, or emotional venting. I outlined the intellectual property theft, the unauthorized use of a minor's likeness, and the targeted public defamation. I instructed him to draft a formal cease and desist notice immediately, to be followed by a comprehensive, relentless litigation strategy. There was no hesitation on my end. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret for what I was about to do to my brother and my mother, but there was only razor-sharp clarity. They were not my family anymore. They were hostile entities. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for far too long. Now I realized it had been an expensive subscription, with me footing the emotional bill. I was clicking cancel, and the cancellation fees were going to bankrupt them. While Adam compiled the digital dossier, I reviewed the historical ledgers of my relationship with Grant and Brenda. I had always been the silent scapegoat, the designated backup plan kept in reserve to subsidize Grant's ascendance. When Grant wanted to launch his tech influencer brand 5 years ago, my mother had wept about his boundless potential. She insisted I co-sign the lease on his expensive downtown studio. I complied. When his first 3 business ventures went bankrupt, I quietly paid his credit card minimums so his credit score would not collapse. I transferred exactly $24,500 over 3 years to keep his lavish lifestyle afloat while I worked 60 hours a week restoring 18th century oil paintings in a windowless basement. I traded my own financial security to finance his grand illusion of success. I received 0 dividends. My sacrifices were never acknowledged as generosity. They were expected as my inherent duty. I was the overlooked art conservator, useful only for cleaning up the structural messes Grant left behind. They treated my resources as their personal trust fund and my dignity as a complimentary bonus. This is where the architecture of evidence becomes a crucial mechanism for survival. For victims of chronic familial gaslighting, memory is often compromised by the abuser's constant, aggressive revisions. You start to doubt your own historical ledgers. But hard evidence is the ultimate form of self-validation. Gathering receipts, tracking bank transfers, and archiving screenshots is not merely about building a watertight legal case. It is the architectural framework of your own objective reality. It proves that you are not crazy, that you did not imagine the systematic exploitation, and that the emotional and financial deficits are mathematically real. Concrete evidence builds an impenetrable fortress around your sanity that their manipulation can no longer breach. I pulled up my banking records from the past half-decade. I systematically exported every wire transfer made to Grant's account. I compiled every text message from Brenda demanding I cover his persistent shortfalls. I was no longer looking at a brother and a mother. I was looking at two severe debtors who had defaulted on every moral and financial contract we had ever signed. The retaliation was justified because the debt was immense and undeniably documented. Grant completely ignored the thousands of dollars I had poured into his crumbling foundation. He ignored the late nights I spent fixing his website coding errors so he could secure his very first sponsors. He took my capital, built his brand, and then used that very brand to weaponize a stolen photograph of my child for a cheap digital laugh. I stared at the neatly organized PDF folders on my glowing screen. This was not an act of emotional revenge. It was strict, unapologetic accounting. They were not going to be shocked by what they had done to me. They were going to be shocked that I had permanently stopped playing along. At 9 o'clock the following morning, my attorney executed the first phase of the operation. He formally served Grant with a cease and desist notice, demanding the immediate removal of Zoe's image and a public retraction. I sat at my desk at the conservation lab, my phone resting silently beside my tools. I fully expected them to double down. Debtors rarely surrender without attempting to renegotiate the terms. At 10:14 in the morning, Grant updated his social media story. He did not remove the post. Instead, he uploaded a video of himself laughing, waving a printed copy of the legal notice at the camera. When your own family threatens to sue you over a harmless joke, he told his followers, shaking his head with manufactured disbelief. Some people really need to learn how to take a joke. He tagged me. 45 minutes later, Brenda deployed her own countermeasure. She published a lengthy status update on her Facebook page. She did not express a single ounce of remorse. It is so sad when sensitive people let their own insecurities tear a loving family apart, she wrote. We used to be able to laugh together. Now, everyone is so quick to call the lawyers over a little innocent humor. Praying for healing, I read their updates with clinical detachment. There was no spike in my heart rate. There was no surge of despair. They were functioning exactly as my models predicted. Their gaslighting was intensifying, confirming what I already knew. They felt zero remorse. They genuinely believed they held proprietary rights to my daughter's face, assuming they were perfectly entitled to leverage Zoe for their personal brand engagement. They viewed us not as human beings, but as raw materials to be mined for content. Their coordinated public response was a massive strategic error on their part. By doubling down, they provided me with fresh, legally binding evidence of malicious intent. I captured Grant's video. I archived Brenda's status update. I forwarded every piece of data directly to my attorney. They were operating under the delusion that familial ties granted them immunity from civil liability. They thought I would eventually fold, intimidated by public pressure and the stigma of suing my own blood. They completely miscalculated my threshold. I was not negotiating a truce. I was initiating a liquidation. The legal boundary had been drawn, and they had chosen to publicly step over it, laughing while they trespassed. I did not text them back. I did not engage in digital warfare in their comment sections. I maintained absolute radio silence. Let them think they were winning the public relations battle. Let them enjoy the cheap engagement metrics and the hollow validation from strangers. They were playing checkers for likes and shares. while I was executing a legally binding checkmate. I picked up my scalpel and returned to the 18th century canvas in front of me, meticulously scraping away layers of accumulated grime. It was tedious, precise work, requiring absolute focus and an unemotional hand. Removing toxic elements from a masterpiece is a delicate process. Removing toxic elements from my life was proving to be exactly the same. The true scope of their liability was uncovered exactly 48 hours later. My attorney's paralegal team had been conducting a deep dive forensic audit of Grant's digital footprint and his recent commercial activities. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my attorney called me on a secure line. He had found the absolute kill shot. The conflict was about to permanently shift from a localized petty family dispute into a high-stakes legal case of digital fraud and commercial exploitation. "Check your encrypted email," my attorney instructed, his voice clinical and sharp. I opened the file he had just transmitted. It was a leaked pitch deck from Grant's management agency, submitted to a major educational software company just 3 days prior. The company had been actively soliciting tech influencers for a lucrative marketing campaign targeting struggling parents. Grant had submitted a formal, detailed proposal, competing for a $60,000 brand ambassadorship. He was currently in the final round of corporate review. I scrolled to the 4th page of the PDF document. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me, suppressing the initial instinct to scream. My pulse steadied not from indifference, but from a newfound, deadly focus. There, displayed prominently as a core component of his proposed marketing strategy, was the stolen photograph of Zoe. He had taken the image of my daughter and embedded it directly into a corporate advertisement mock-up. The caption that had humiliated my child was never intended to be a mere family joke. It was a calculated A/B test for market engagement. It was a drafted tagline for a sponsored post. He was actively attempting to monetize his niece's face to sell educational software, explicitly framing her as the mistake that their corporate product could supposedly fix. This was not a misguided attempt at digital humor. This was premeditated commercial theft. Grant had packaged my 6-year-old daughter as a raw marketing asset to secure a massive corporate payout. Brenda's digital laughter suddenly made perfect sense on the ledger. She wasn't just laughing at a cruel joke. She was deliberately engaging with the post to artificially inflate the metrics, boosting the analytics to make Grant's pitch look more attractive to the software executives. She was an active co-conspirator in the fraud. I closed the PDF file. The emotional detachment I felt was absolute. They had crossed the definitive line from toxic relatives into corporate thieves. My attorney outlined the next phase of our counteroffensive. We were no longer just filing a cease and desist. We were preparing a massive civil suit for commercial misappropriation of likeness, intellectual property theft, and fraudulent commercial practices. We were going to contact the software company's legal department directly, providing them with irrefutable proof that their prospective influencer was attempting to sell them stolen, unauthorized assets belonging to a minor. I gave my attorney the explicit authorization to proceed with maximum prejudice. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. They had quantified Zoe's worth at $60,000. Now, I was going to mathematically demonstrate the true cost of that caption. The audit had escalated. This was no longer just about establishing a boundary. It was about executing a complete financial and professional demolition of his brand. Grant thought he was a brilliant digital architect, building an empire on stolen ground. He was about to discover what happens when the rightful owner forecloses on the property. I arranged the meeting via a cold, single-line text message. I informed Grant that we needed to discuss a potential financial settlement regarding his post. His sheer greed completely overrode his caution, and he eagerly agreed to meet me at a high-end cafe downtown. I arrived exactly on time. I did not order a coffee or engage in small talk. I simply sat across from him, placing my phone face down on the marble table, the high-definition voice recorder silently running. Grant smirked immediately, leaning back in his chair with the arrogant, relaxed posture of a man who firmly believed he had already won the negotiation. "Look, Maya, you're taking this way too seriously," he began, completely unprompted. It is just business. The engagement metrics on that post were absolutely insane. That educational software company loved the traction. I am about to close a $60,000 deal, and honestly, you should be thanking me. I made your kid viral. I let him speak. I let his bloated ego dig the legal trench deeper. I did not interrupt, nor did I display a single ounce of anger. I simply sat perfectly still and let him explicitly confess to commercial intent and unauthorized monetization on a recorded line. I knew this was the only way to hold him accountable for the lies he had spun for years. I was protecting my daughter's future in a single-party consent state. Once he finished detailing exactly how he planned to personally profit off my daughter's face, I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. That educational software company just received a formal legal notice from my attorney. I stated, "My voice is level and cold as a sheet of glass. They have been informed that the central visual asset in your pitch deck is stolen property. They have formally paused our partnership negotiation, citing a severe violation of their internal ethics and risk management policies regarding intellectual property." Grant's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. The blood drained completely from his face as the brutal reality of the transaction hit his ledger. I did not stop. Furthermore, my legal team has sent copies of your pitch deck along with the cease and desist to your 3 current primary tech sponsors. They are aggressively reviewing the morality clauses in your existing contracts as we speak. By the time I walked out of the cafe, the professional demolition was already fully underway. The legal fallout was rapid. Within a week, the major tech sponsors, terrified of being publicly associated with child exploitation and digital fraud, formally severed all ties. His management agency terminated his contract, citing severe liability risks. The $60,000 deal evaporated instantly, taking his entire established revenue stream with it. His brand suffered a total, irrevocable structural collapse. The final term of my settlement was absolutely non-negotiable. To avoid a devastating civil trial that would bankrupt him permanently, Grant was forced to capitulate to my exact demands. He had to delete the original post and replace it with a formal, legally drafted apology video. He had to explicitly admit to stealing the photograph and exploiting a minor for commercial gain. The video had to be pinned to the top of his social media profile for exactly 30 days. My attorney ensured a strict stipulation was embedded in the contract. Grant was legally barred from monetizing the apology video, turning off all ads and revenue sharing. He was forced to broadcast his utter humiliation to his entire remaining audience, generating zero capital from his own destruction. It was the flawless execution of absolute judgment. The silence that followed the total collapse of Grant's digital empire was the most profound, absolute peace I had experienced in 33 years. The incessant family group chats went entirely dark. Brenda permanently stopped posting passive-aggressive status updates about sensitive people. Their humiliation was absolute, intensely public, and mathematically undeniable. They had arrogantly attempted to leverage my 6-year-old daughter for corporate profit, and the resulting financial penalty had completely liquidated their social standing and Grant's entire career. My personal boundary was no longer an invisible emotional line they could casually step over whenever they pleased. It was a reinforced concrete wall built on legally binding contracts and irrefutable proof. I returned to my quiet conservation lab, my hands perfectly steady as I worked on restoring a new canvas. Sitting in the silence, I reflected heavily on the true nature of evidence. I realized that hard evidence is the only bridge between a toxic past and an independent future. It wasn't about winning an argument, it was about reclaiming my reality. Meticulously gathering that data allowed me to stop helplessly fighting their distorted narrative and simply overwrite it with undeniable facts. I had successfully become the master architect of my own peace, using their own digital footprints as the very bricks to permanently seal them out of our lives. The ledger was finally closed. The complex transaction was fully complete, and the massive debt had been paid in full through their total professional and social bankruptcy. I've come to realize that protecting your peace sometimes requires becoming the villain in someone else's distorted story. For a long time, I thought being a good daughter and a good sister meant endlessly absorbing their impact and carrying their weight. I thought forgiveness was a mandatory family tax that I was forced to pay. But forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I had to forgive myself for not establishing these structural boundaries sooner. I had to forgive myself for ever believing I deserved the assigned role of the silent scapegoat. It was a messy, painful process of deconstruction. I didn't reach inner peace overnight. I had to systematically dismantle the guilt they had installed in me like a faulty foundation. True healing didn't come from their apology video, which was legally forced and entirely hollow anyway, but from the quiet realization that the storm had finally passed. Healing came from the profound, quiet realization that my daughter and I are inherently worthy of absolute protection, and that I possess the unshakable strength to be the one who provides it. The air in my home feels different now, lighter, cleaner, entirely ours. We are safe, and we are finally free. If you've ever had to set a boundary with family, tell me your story in the comments. Hit share if you believe in protecting your peace.